Now we'll transition into the Q&A, and today we have a pleasure of welcoming Jidi, the producer and director of a Rohingya Ramadan, as well as and I would like to welcome a special guest who will be joining us for this discussion as well, Haley Risma, independent researcher on human rights and non-state governance. And today we'll have a small Q&A. Yes. Oh, is it on? You have to switch it on first. And hopefully we'll be
That helps. Yes,
yes, we'll be briefly talking about the movie, the production, what inspired this, and then we'll do a Q&A session with all the participants. So please take it away, Jidi.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed or maybe at least like learned something from this movie a little bit. So people ask me like what brought you to this topic and why did you decide to do this film? And for me, I've been living in Bangkok for the past 3 years. And I think, as we all know, there are a lot of journalists, people working in NGOs, INGOs that are working on Myanmar or Rohingya related issues. But at the same time, I kind of saw in mainstream media, mainly news kind of expressed in numbers when there's another crisis, when there's aid cuts. Just last week, a boat that capsized, 250 people, amongst them Rohingya, are missing. That was a news flash. Just in this month as well, the rations that were restored to $12 went back for some families to 10, and even some other families to $7 a month. So those are kind of the news flashes that people tend to get. But for me as a documentary maker, and I have a research, kind of ethnographic research background, I always wonder about what about the people. And this has grown, like the Cox's Bazar refugee camps has grown into kind of the unglamorous title of the world's largest refugee camps. But I think we don't really see that many visuals or hear about life inside the camps from the people themselves. So when I saw that there was a slot for Al Jazeera documentary that said like stories from or stories about Ramadan, I thought like, oh, could that be kind of an interesting framing and a kind of way into the camps, and not the least because obviously one of the reasons they're being persecuted is because they're Muslim. So that's kind of how I started off. And then for me, having moved around a lot in my life, I'm always quite conscious of like being an outsider, telling stories as an outsider. So I wanted to make sure that I would find the right collaborators. And the process was literally, I reached out to a quite prominent Rohingya activist, Nason Lin, on Facebook, Instagram, anywhere I can find him. And I try to get him on a call just to kind of put this idea forward to him and like get his blessing, but also ask like, who can I work together with who lives inside the camps for kind of like the creative team. So the producer and also the director of photography, Sohel Khan, who is probably watching online on the Facebook stream, as well as Yassin, Abdumonab. They are still residing in the camp, and they were immediately like, okay, how can we help, and what do you need to be able to get this made? And even during post-production, some of these considerations continued, even though it was challenging to find post-producers with the maybe technical experience who were Rohingya. Then we kind of chose to find people who are Burmese. A lot of them cannot be named because they are living in exile as well, and a lot of translators, and our post-producers here with us today as well, Angkan Situ in the back, just because I really wanted to just because I really wanted almost myself to be the only outsider who maybe just initiated this project, but as much as I was able to find collaborators, and even like some of the music that we use to be really from the community, if you will. And then in deciding who to follow for this documentary, I was quite keen on having an ensemble. I think that was already clear to me in the beginning because I wanted to cover these different perspectives, but I also wanted to bring people into this film who audience might not expect in this kind of context. So like Rohel, the first Rohingya rapper in the camp, he actually came up to me. I think it was our second or third day of filming. And he was like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Just started to chat to me. And he was like, "I make music. Do you want to listen to it?" And he played it for me. And I actually quite like and genuinely really liked his music. And then I thought about like, should I include him? He's a minor. And then 2 days later, I decided to go back to him and kind of ask him, like, would you like to be featured in this film? And can I maybe also use your music for this film? And he was very smart. He said, yes, but under the condition that you also join me for an interview for my YouTube content channel. So so it was like, I think that little negotiation like kind of still makes me smile because obviously, yes, he's a refugee. Like he says, he grew up inside the camps, but he knows the value of content very well, and also just like his voice. So when we did that interview at the end, he had, prepared like great questions, but also a little game that he could then edit kind of the first 10 seconds of his YouTube video just to like kind of work the algorithm. And he obviously knows what he's doing because last I checked, he had 180,000 followers on Facebook and on YouTube. So I think that was also my way to kind of bring forward a bit of like unexpected savviness. I think just like, influencer culture is something that people talk about or think about a lot, maybe on social media, but that is also definitely a flex inside the camps. But unfortunately, his level of exposure also come with some risk. So I learned a few months ago that he received a lot of threats from religious extremist groups inside the camp who basically did not appreciate him storytelling or perhaps making music that is in a rap category, and it caused a lot of problems for him. So he had to move outside the camps with his family just for their own like kind of security. And a final thought I want to share today is about how storytelling functions for people with perhaps less agency. There's a book that I read that is called The Ungrateful Refugee by the Iranian American writer Dina Nayeri. And she critiqued how asylum and host country systems, they kind of demand refugees to deliver these like perfect narratives, trauma focused, tidy victim tropes, and kind of stripping away any complexity. And only then, if they can narrate their own survival stories in that way, are they deemed credible. And I think I noticed a bit of this as well when me and my team were conducting the interviews in a camp, that they would give like very clear kind of chronological stories with like dates and kind of the most dramatic things that had happened in their life or in their journey towards the camps. And whenever I tried to probe a bit deeper into, their inner world or how they felt about certain things, I was actually met with a bit of confusion. And it felt like they were not necessarily clear what I wanted from them. So they were trying to guess what I wanted to hear, and when I thought about that further, just like kind of observing throughout the month that I spent in the camp, I think it made a lot of sense to me because I think most Rohingya people in the camps rarely interact with anyone else outside of their own community, unless it's to ask about their ration token or what's happening with their resettlement case or navigating some other camp bureaucracy. So they always have to, kind of make it like, okay, this is very urgent and I've done my work. So again, these like very linear focused stories. And outside of that, they don't really interact with like anyone outside their own community. So I think this film is my small attempt, at least, to observe, go along, listen, and also just giving space for things that don't neatly fit inside that narrative box. And at the back, we also have some prints that I brought today, which are taken by Abdullah, who's the photographer featured inside in the film, Yassin, who's the DOP, and myself. And for that, we're selling these prints to collect funds for the Mayu Sunlight Community High School in Camp One East. And they are currently at 14 teachers serving about 500 students. So if there's any prints that you like, I will sit there after this, and yeah, you can ask me more questions about it. And then I want to hand over to Haley, who I actually had the pleasure to meet while I was filming inside the camps.
Yeah, so as Jidi said, we met first because a friend connected us saying, like, she reached out to me saying there's this filmmaker coming, she wants to like know more, she wants a friend to hang out with. So yeah, I've been working with Rohingya for about since 2021, both remotely, and I also lived in Cox's Bazar for the last 2 years. I just moved to Thailand in January. And this was actually my first time seeing the film, to be honest, and I was surprised at how emotional it made me. I think some of it was just like going back to some of those same spots. A lot of the characters featured I've also like know personally. Abdullah really is like the coolest person you've ever met. Also makes really great lepato. But I think what really sticks out to me about like my time working with Rohingya, both from within the official response and from the outside of the response looking in, is how much everyone was always trying to talk over the Rohingya community. And that was whether it was the humanitarians, the Bangladesh government, the international community themselves, everyone always had their own agenda and really had no interest in like actually sitting with them and learning with and like learning about them and learning who they are, and even facilitating space for them to be able to speak on their own. Like as Jidi's film shows, like they are of course incredibly capable and have their own thoughts and have their own ideas about like what they want their future to look like. And I think this film really like highlights that. And I also think that if a lot of humanitarians I worked with over the years saw this, they would see a camp that like they don't recognize, which is a bit sad to me, but I think, I don't know, something they should see.
This is the part where we can open to questions, comments, anything else people wanted to contribute.
Any comments, thoughts, or questions? Okay.
It's a really great film. What do many Rohingya live outside of the camp? And are there supportive businesses outside of the camp that try and help the refugees in the camp? And so someone like the rap performer, for example, if he gets paid for having followers, what kind of banking system would he use? Are they just always stuck inside the camp, or is there an outlet even though they are stateless people?
Do you want to take the first part as
We'll take 2 more questions.
So we'll do 2 more questions for this. Any other question or comments before we go ahead and answer that?
Sure.
It's not really a question. I just want to say, Jidi, thank you so much. I think it's really a great job. I know the camps reasonably well, and you've done a wonderful job of getting generations and people speaking in their own voices. And I agree with Haley that from what I've seen, that doesn't happen often enough. So thank you. But I'm also interested in what time of day you filmed, because I noticed sometimes the markets were so beautiful. And I usually was there later in the day when they weren't quite so beautiful. So I'd love to know more about your film process.
Last one before we start answering.
I'll try to make the question short. I was thinking about how well the subject of this documentary, right? It's a group of vulnerable people that have been imposed with so many stereotypes, privilege, prejudices, and meanings, which are so prevalent uh, in the global culture, like labels like refugee or just like racial stereotypes. So when you are making this film, how do you make sure that you don't reproduce these meanings that could make them more vulnerable? Yeah, I'm interested in that.
Okay, all right. Please. Go.
Do you want to take the first one about generally like if there's any assistance from people outside of the
Yeah, it was about like working outside the camps and then also just livelihoods and all of that, right? Yeah, so the short answer is no, the Rohingya are not allowed to work. Bangladesh takes a very anti-integration policy. All their rhetoric is about how repatriation has to happen tomorrow. However, none of their actions actually meaningfully support that. Instead, their policies are much more geared towards making sure the Rohingya stay inside the camps. Legally, they're not allowed to leave the camps. In 2021, they even built a barbed wire fence around it. It's incredibly dehumanizing. You have to go past armed guards to enter. Now, how tightly that movement is regulated depends on the whims of the law enforcement on that day. So working outside the camps is very illegal. That said, a ton of people do it. If you go down to the camps, there's a big market called Kutupalong Bazaar, and that's majority Rohingya. And like it's kind of an unspoken thing. Everyone knows it. And not to mention, it's your typical border town, right? And before colonization, all of this, like there was a lot of Rohingya and Bengali all in this same area. And so there's a lot of people who actually do still have historical roots to the same region. So really even determining who is Rohingya, who is Bengali, all of that is a fraught question. So anyway, all this will say, yes, Rohingya do integrate into the community despite the restrictions on movement, but there are a lot of barriers to them actually being able to meaningfully access livelihoods. And that's again because of these anti-integration policies. They're not allowed to have bank accounts, they're not allowed to have IDs. So all these questions about like how they make money. When I've worked with Rohingya researchers in the past, usually some of them can get fake IDs made and then they can get access to Bcash, which is like an online mobile banking system there. Other Rohingya, I've had to like they'll send money to my bank account and then I can get out cash for them. So it really just depends, but there's a lot of ingenuity that has to happen for them to be able to operate in systems that we really take for granted.
Yeah, and I think I would like to add to that maybe one anecdote because I did work with an all Rohingya crew and I work with international crew often. So at one point I wanted them to help me rent some equipment. So I was like, okay, give me your bank account or can you send me an invoice so that I can wire the money so that you can go rent that equipment. And then they were like, okay, invoice, no problem. Then wire bank account and they were like, oh, can you maybe use Bcash? And at that point I had not used Bcash before, and like I kind of ignorantly or naively said a bank transfer would be easier for me or would be more convenient, until I realized like of course they don't have a bank account. So even though they work with Al Jazeera, they work with BBC, they work with like any large, I would say, outlet, whether it's print or news publication around the world, and they're being treated as like kind of just like international teams on the ground. There were so many hurdles. Just a simple act of like getting them paid was so difficult, and I think that's also that really made me think later about like, you know, what does it mean to be stateless? How difficult, or what are the practicalities of it? Like, I think we all know if you're stateless, you don't have a passport, so cross-border travel will be challenging, but so much more than cross-border travel, even just like very like kind of daily purchases getting paid, or people using e-commerce, for example, or ordering food, or just like kind of anything you want to operate on a mobile phone. Also, how do you register for a mobile phone number if you don't have an ID that it can be linked to? I think increasingly the way with like kind of digitization and tying everyone's like electronic footprint to a ID document will make it more and more challenging for stateless people to move around in the world. Yeah.
Then we have a question on the process of
Yeah.
filmmaking, right?
The sunlight, yeah. The right time of day in the right location. That was just like such a benefit of working with local crew, and also with so for Yassin Abdumonab, this was the first time he was the director of photography, because usually he gets engaged as a fixer to field producer to camera assistant but he's basically done all of the different roles on a production, whether it's news or like long form documentary, so he really knows. I would just kind of actually for the initial concept stage, so I kind of put like a visual guide together just to give a sense of what I think it would look like, and I used his photos to kind of populate that mood board or concept board, if you will. And then later on, also, we would just kind of discuss. I would tell him what I would have in my head, and then he would either pull up a reference photo from that location that he had, or if he didn't have it, sometimes I asked him for like, you know, drone shots, or like kind of that flood prevention wall that he was like, oh, let's just drive around to a few of them and see which one you like. So yeah, that actually went very smooth. And I think the sort of golden hour light there is so beautiful. And then there's this one, I think it's like the market on Army Road that kind of slopes down. So there you can really get some beautiful visuals, and it's very crowded around that time as well.
Next
Then
thing, the last question.
the last question. Yeah, I think that's such a great question that probably doesn't have a clean answer, right? It's like how when making a documentary or any form of content, any piece of content, how to not kind of how to not reperpetrate as like, you know, kind of the stigmas or the stereotypes or the labels. I am not sure if this film succeeded in doing that, or where that lands, but I think at least from my consideration, the process to go through, I already mentioned, like, you know, working with people, that is one. But I think also the first day, and also for me to decide to take a whole month, to spend a whole month there, so that it was not only about having enough time to film, but also learning enough, observing enough, talking to people enough, so that in post-production, in the editing process, I had a better sense check of like what I wanted to include and what not, to maybe avoid like, you know, leaning into certain stereotypes. And I think even the process of being there, with every person or every character that we featured, the first time I would visit them, I would do it without cameras, and I would take as long as it needs to ask them if they have any questions about the film or about the team, or even personal questions about me. And I wanted to also make sure that they understood that if this does get broadcasted or goes online, maybe there's a clip that goes viral, like, do you worry about that? What are the impacts for you and maybe for your family or for dependents, or your future career, like the student, right? She was planning to study abroad. Like, you know, what kind of impact does it have? And like, actually with her, she had a lot of questions, as you might be able to imagine, because she was quite diligent. I think we spent about 4 hours talking. before she agreed, before she was like, okay, I want to join. And it was just like, it was like 5 hours of nonstop, 4 hours of nonstop questions. And I think maybe she only stopped or at the end because she was quite hungry and thirsty. And she was just like, okay, I think most of the things check out. And I think that this team are like good people, right? So I think there's a bit of that. And I think one thing that I was also clear about kind of embarking on this film is that I didn't want to add in too much of my thoughts or observations or summaries about what the situation is, like what the crisis entails. So so you might have noticed that I didn't open with in Myanmar in 19 whatever, trying to like kind of narrate that history, or I only had a little bit of text on screen because I did want to show, you know, it's like over 1 million people, to kind of communicate the size and kind of the level of stuckness. But beyond that is what we call in filmmaking cold open. It's just like you just start somewhere, you're just right there, and then seeing, just observing people kind of speaking for themselves, like not having a voiceover was another choice. And I think, I hope that all of those things kind of combined at least helps put in some of the checks, but also, you know, some of the tendencies that media people or even documentary makers or even ethnographers have to avoid overly perpetrating some of those like issues that you mentioned. And I think I also decided to keep that clean from the film, and instead I when I came back, a lot of footage, but also a lot of unfinished thoughts. So I actually wrote down all my thoughts first, almost as a way to purge, which was later published in a long read that is now available on Guernica magazine. But it was kind of like to be able to separate the two. So those are my thoughts, my reflections, my inquiries that probably no one in the camp cared about particularly. And then the film is just me observing, listening, and yes, asking the questions, but however people wanted to answer is what made it in the film.
Okay, thank you so much. So I guess we don't have time for more questions, but we do have reception outside that you can hang out and have some snacks. What I want to ask you is, what is next for the film? Like, what is the next step for this film?
Yeah, next step, we have got some great requests from different universities across the world, some of them more fancy than I can afford, who have asked us to screen it at sometimes their Center for Forced Migration or Displacement, but also journalism and kind of more storytelling audiences. Including Thammasat University here in Bangkok, including Oxford University in the UK and Boston University. So I'm always quite happy when there's an educational institution interested in the films, because I hope that, you know, that it can just like bring something to maybe the next generation of storytellers, filmmakers, or people who are going to work on migration related issues.
Okay, thank you so much. And another round of applause for the film and a wonderful work. Thank you so much for joining us today at Sea Junction. Again, we are a public space and an independent venue. So donation from participants like yourself helps us in keeping up with our programs and bringing more programs like this to this space where everyone can participate and join. The donation box is at the door. We have the reception outside with some light snacks, coffee break and tea break, and also some photographs for sale on the side. Thank you for joining us this evening, and hopefully we'll see you again. Have a good night.